got some questions for you, and I'm hoping that they'll be challenging because I really want to make you guys think, and it's just stuff that I think it affects everybody who has a tutoring business, anyone who started one, anybody who's in the thick of it right now. We've done a lot of one-to-one lessons online through Zoom with our students. I want to hear from both of you. Tell me about one-to-one tutoring situation where things were going well, and then I want to hear about one where it was just awkward and terrible, but you learned from it.
So when, for example, one of my students, he's working on English language paper 1, the GCSE paper, and I sent him the work, so because we're working on this booklet, I gave him homework to complete a question. I put the expectations on there. I've put a model answer for him to look at so he knows how to structure his writing. And with this particular student, he's quite high level, so it was more of practice and just checking which areas he needed to work on. So I felt the lesson, when we met up the next day, it went smoothly because he knew he already did the homework, and that I can give him more feedback. I have more time to give him more feedback and be really specific on his needs. Those type of sessions goes really well, and that went really well for that particular student.
When I was a tutor, so obviously now I coach people, but if I'm talking specifically about tutors, I always used to find they'd really connect when I relate it to real life. I would tell them stories of how I struggled myself so that they can see like, oh, you can still get somewhere when you're struggling, or oh, I'm not the only one struggling. Or especially with when I was tutoring A-level psychology, it can be very theory heavy, text heavy, textbooks. When you just connect it to a real life situation. So I remember talking to someone about, this is about how judges value like attractiveness in sentencing. So I gave them a real life example from my job. So when I was a tutoring psychology, I'd always give real life situations, and then that would just connect it much easier.
I remember having a particular student that didn't understand boundaries, and because there was issues happening outside of my control really, at that time I was going to their house to tutor them, and at a time I was going about 8 p.m. So in the winter time, that's like getting really dark, and it got to a point the parent would leave me to tutor them. If that ever occurs where there's a lot of safeguarding red flags, you have a responsibility. Even if you're not working in a school, you have a responsibility as a tutor, as a private tutor, to kind of put your expectations on and put boundaries. And I did say to the parent, I think it's wise that you're in the room or you're in a room next door, so you know clearly what's happening, because safeguarding, I can't be on my own with the student.
Maybe the answer is obvious, but why did you feel like you couldn't be alone? Because I know that when I have other parents kind of lurking around, I actually get nervous. Like, unless I really need them, can you go away? But you can say it diplomatically. But what was it that kind of bugged you about the parent is AWOL?
This particular student, her parents were getting a divorce, and so there was a lot of issues happening. Obviously, I wanted to respect their home. Even online, you might have some issues with the student where they might say inappropriate things when you're tutoring them, and it's your responsibility to
what?
Just maybe talk about things that are happening outside, like talk about like maybe sexual references. And sometimes as when you're a tutor, they see you as almost like a friend, And so it could get a bit blurred, the boundaries, if you don't set it. So they get comfortable, and they might talk about things like, they might talk about a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and they might talk about things that they've done, and and they might go in too much detail, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. And it's like, look, I'm still your tutor, and I would when I have got into a situation like, especially with this particular student, I've said, look, I'm your tutor. This is a professional environment. I don't feel comfortable with X, Y, and Z. I will have to speak to your parent about this, and that is really important because, you know, they like you, and you're developing a good rapport, but at the same time, you're a professional, you're not their friend. You have to set that expectation and set that boundary.
As you were talking, I was thinking of a bad one, and it was an online person doing A-level psychology, and he just did not want to be there. You could tell his mum had practically forced him to be there. And you could tell that in the tone of voice that she was talking towards him, in the expectations she had of me. You know, it was this time of year coming up to exams. And I find when you've got people that want last minute help, they put all that angst onto you as the tutor and expect you to like get their student up from like a D to an A in a couple of weeks. So I think that's one of the most challenging things, when you've got high expectations of a parent in a short space of time, and a student who's just so demotivated. You can't change that motivation in a couple of weeks. That's long-term stuff, and long-term stuff that's gone on between the parent and the student in their relationship as parent and son, parent and daughter, that it's kind of like they've got all that baggage already that then comes to you as a tutor that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, so as an American, I thought I'd do pretty well over here, but come to find out, my tutoring friends and one of their husbands, they've both written books, and I haven't actually written and published a book. I feel kind of behind. This one's for the ladies. Now, if you're a gentleman and you're watching this, you don't have to go away, but if you're a female, come a little closer, we're gonna talk. Do you feel you have to prove yourself as a female business owner, especially when you've had conventional jobs in the past? You're doing this online thing now. We're all entrepreneurs. Do you feel like you have to prove yourself like a little bit harder than you would have in your conventional job?
Absolutely. I would add as well, I feel, not only as a woman but as a black woman, I do feel sometimes, not all the time, I don't feel like I need to prove myself if I'm speaking to another entrepreneur, another business provider that wants more of my services. But especially sometimes when I'm speaking to a parent, I feel I have been checked regarding with my credentials before. Like, that's why on my website I put my LinkedIn resume, because I have been checked with that. Oh, how much experience have you got in in teaching? Are you qualified and stuff like that? Even though I've got so many reviews with my services. So yeah, I do. And especially also with price, they might look at it and go, oh, and they might look at me and automatically think that I'm going to be cheap.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And it does get frustrating, but I'm starting to just learn that it's not about, obviously everyone, we all judge on how everyone looks and whatever, and also I'm not a conventional tutor. I'm very out there, outgoing, in your face, a bit mad, you know,
yourself,
bit hello, performance. I love theatre, I write scripts and stuff like that, so I'm not a conventional tutor, but regardless of that, I can get the results. Some, not all, but some parents might get that misunderstood. So
I feel the same. I feel like especially as an entrepreneur, especially when I first started, not everything, but there's a lot of male dominated strategy. You need to do this, you need to make $1 million. And that's what's out there dominating, and that's the parallel of what dominates the workplace. Male dominated narratives, and I think that's the thing that's hard to break through. It's really hard to find, I found them now, but it took me a long time to find other women that look like me, that have a similar ethos. It's not always about strategy, battle, competition. So I feel like that's the hardest thing, is finding your people and being like, my background is in criminology, psychology. We learn a lot about structural inequality, and that, I think, is the hardest barrier. It's not it is kind of your mindset, but it's also the structural barriers. You know, we're parents, we're mums, you know, I'm single mum, so that means I'm already behind. And I used to teach my tutors about stuff like this, about the inequalities, that we're not all starting at the same pace. You know, some of us are behind because, okay, you're a single parent, less time, less money, which means now I have to find another job for another income, which means I've got less time. So when these men that are dominating the scene say, you can grow your business in 12 months, well, yeah, if you've got your wife at home looking after the kids, and
you've got
you had a
time.
decent salary, and you've got all these things stacked up in your favour. But if you don't, if you're a regular person like myself, or like Nat, or like many of these people watching, you have a lot of things stacked against you. So yes, you're always thinking to prove yourself. Even the other day I was at a conference, this is the second person that said it now, and they said, oh, you should do a professional doctorate. My old self would have been like, oh yeah, because that'll give me more credentials. But I feel like now, you know, I'm an author, business owner, parent. I don't need any more credentials, but it took me lots of internal growth to get to that point, to realise I don't need any more external credentials. And it's kind of that battle between society and working on your mindset, so that you know within that you are worthy. And that's what I coach my students to believe as well.
Girl power, you go girl, yeah.
I want to know about finances, because nothing has taught me more about finances than the past few years of my life, especially owning and running and managing and budgeting and a business. So I want to know, let's talk about your past for a second, whatever you guys are willing to reveal. Who taught you about finances? Because in the US, you don't actually properly learn about them. You just...
Same in England. I remember my family would have the heating off. You'd be walking around the house cold because it's going to cost money to turn on the light switch. I'm sure lots of you can relate.
You mean the heat?
The heating or the lights, you know, like the heating wouldn't be on. You couldn't have the lights on. You'd have to turn them off to save money. The narrative was money is scarce. You have to work hard to get money. That was the narrative in my household. And no one really taught me in my family about money. I feel like my friends, we had similar access to money, you know, similar budgets, I would say. When I went to uni, I started asking questions more about money, because I had to then budget for myself. I remember having to choose an accommodation and looking at the different prices, and me just automatically always going for the cheapest option, because that's what I knew from family. And then I remember asking my parents about like mortgages, and then asking them when I got my first salaried job. So going from like £4 an hour to actually getting a salary, I was like, well, is 14,000 a lot of money? Pension, things like that. So I was in my 20s when I was really learning about money. And then when I went traveling when I was 18, 19, I had to work, save money, but it was still that same narrative that you need to exchange your time for money. So I remember doing a couple of car boots, but that was still exchanging time. So I guess that was my first experience of business making.
Well, my family, when I grew up, I wouldn't say money was tight. I think because I was quite spoilt as a child, I have to be honest with myself.
Lucky you.
But I was a sport brat, but I wasn't taught how to manage money properly, and that's the problem. I was taught that, you know, money is it's not endless. I was taught to work for my money and have a good work ethic, but I wasn't taught how to manage it. So then when I got money, I was like, either I would save excessively or I would spend excessively. It was no in between. And so as I got older, my husband has taught me a lot with finance. I feel sometimes when you're married or when you're with a partner, and one person might be stronger than the other when it comes to finance, you might be reliant on that person a bit too much. And I felt like I was quite reliant on my husband when it comes to finances, and just be like, okay, yeah, figure it out, you know. And I learned along the way that I've got to manage my finances and make sure I'm financially literate myself. So he did introduce me to a few financial books, especially Dave Ramsey. Anyone that needs help with budgeting and all that stuff, I highly recommend Dave Ramsey, The Total Money Makeover. I'm telling you, that book changed the whole perception of how I look at money. So I was reading that, but I feel like that change happened. It took a few years for that change to happen. And even now, I'm constantly developing my financial education. I'm on a finance course now, and there's nothing wrong with that. I feel you have to be a long life learner. So yeah, I feel like now I have a healthy perception of money.
So what did you learn, Jess, as being a business owner? What has that taught you about finances?
Well, I realized, or I can't talk about business finances without first talking about the previous job. So when I was teaching in the school system, you are paid the exact same amount every month, no matter what, as long as you're employed with that school. So the good thing about that is you know what's coming. The bad thing is there's really a ceiling. Maybe you want to make more money in that job, but you can't. You've got to go get a separate job. But the dream with online tutoring was, okay, I want to make just as much as I did when I was teaching in the classroom. Great. So I was able to do that, but definitely not in the first 2 years of the business. And even then, I had months where there's some months are high earning months and some are lower. Like summer's typically summer was a little bit lower than like October or March. But I realized that you do kind of have to know how to do math, at least just practical math, because let's say pretend like I want to make $100,000 a year. I have to divide that by 12 and then figure out, okay, if I think I can make 100K, or even if I want to make 50K a year, I have to figure out how many hours I can work, if I can sell a course and how to price that course, or anything extra that pertains to the business. I have to figure that out. Because there's other life goals I want. I want to travel. I really do want to be able to eat out without feeling guilty. I want to buy some things without feeling like, oh, you need to save. Because I was definitely taught, save everything, don't spend anything. And it was, that has its own levels of stress. You always have some money saved up, but then you're like, you feel a little bit like, I call it like the Scrooge mentality. Sometimes I will spend money and have buyer's remorse because just the way I grew up. And you know, my family would argue, well, it's better than just spending all your money and then being in debt. And I said yes. I mean, we heavily bought into the Dave Ramsey thing, and I agree with most parts of that, what we call that system. But financial literacy is something that it's too bad we couldn't learn it well in school. I try to throw it into my lessons if it's relevant to when I'm teaching students. Even if they don't see it coming, but I'll say, by the way, here is some advice that I learned recently.
Would you ever do a financial literacy course for your students?
That would be a part of the 5-year business plan. A financial literacy course. At this point, I could teach it like at a really basic level, or maybe my husband could. I think there's some cool projects you could do. Some schools I think are getting on board with it, and they're realizing, let's teach kids what a budget is. I didn't know what the board budget was. I didn't realize it was a noun and a verb. When I was in high school, I thought it meant cheap, but that's not true. It just means
like budget price,
managing,
like Walmart budget. Yeah,
I thought it was a negative thing. I was like, I don't want to be a budget girl, but I don't want to be broke. I knew broke was bad. I'm like, don't want to be broke. It happened many times in college, not gonna lie.
Being an online tutor it can get lonely. You're at home on your own, you know, doing your tutoring, running your business. And this is the thing I love about us. Like, we just can get together and have so much jokes and laughs. Like, we do have a strategy, we do have an agenda to film our YouTube and everything. And like, I really liked our chats about the non-tutoring stuff, like about finance, where we get to learn a little bit deeper about each other, our values, our beliefs, our upbringing, about money and stuff, and just getting together, having fun. And that's what I want your students and tutors to remember, is get together to have like fun moments, and you'll blossom in life.
Guess what? They love my sandwiches so much. They're filming it. Makes me feel good. I'm no chef. That would be
Wait,
my sandwiches. Not bad.
Give me a nice sandwich.
Do you like the triangle shape that I made?
Mmm.
My mom used to cut them like that, so makes them a little bit
You
cuter. I
toasted
guess.
it perfectly.